The first time I saw Luca Moretti collapse, nobody ran to help him. That was the moment I understood something was deeply wrong inside that penthouse. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows hard enough to make the glass tremble in its frame while I pushed my cleaning cart across the marble hallway on the 43rd floor of the Moretti Tower. Manhattan looked blurry beyond the storm, all silver lights and black shadows melting together beneath the midnight rain. My shift was supposed to end at 1 a.m., but rich people never cared about schedules. Especially not men like Luca Moretti. Even before I met him, I knew his name. Everyone in the city did. Restaurants lowered their voices when he walked in. Politicians smiled too carefully around him. Men in tailored black suits followed him like shadows that breathed. Some people called him a businessman. Others called him something worse. I just called him the reason this building paid me $28 an hour to clean in silence and never ask questions. The penthouse doors stood open when I reached the private wing. That alone made my stomach tighten. They were never open. 2 security guards stood outside pretending not to notice me while thunder rolled across the city. One of them nodded toward the hallway. "Finish the east rooms tonight," he muttered. "And stay out of Mr. Moretti's office." I nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." My sneakers squeaked softly against the marble as I stepped inside. The penthouse looked more like a museum than a home. Black stone floors. White leather furniture nobody sat on. Expensive paintings that felt cold instead of beautiful. The entire place smelled faintly of whiskey, cedar, and something metallic underneath it all. I kept my head down and started working. Spray bottle. Cloth. Quiet breathing. That was how you survived around powerful men. You became invisible. 20 minutes later, I heard the glass shatter. The sound cracked through the silence so suddenly that I nearly dropped the cleaning supplies in my hands. Then came something worse. A heavy thud. Like a body hitting the floor. Every instinct told me to walk away. But another sound followed. A rough cough. Weak. Struggling. Human. I turned the corner before I could stop myself. Luca Moretti lay beside the grand piano in the living room, one hand gripping the edge of the marble floor while dark red blood stained the white sleeve of his dress shirt. A crystal whiskey glass lay shattered nearby. For one frozen second, I forgot how to breathe. He looked nothing like the terrifying man people whispered about. No cold confidence. No power. Just pale skin, shaking hands, and exhaustion carved deep beneath gray-blue eyes. He tried to push himself up and failed. The strange part wasn't that he collapsed. The strange part was the guard standing 10 feet away doing absolutely nothing. They didn't move toward him. Didn't call for help. Didn't even look surprised. Like this happened all the time. Luca coughed again, quieter this time, and blood touched the corner of his mouth before he wiped it away angrily. His eyes lifted toward me then. Sharp even through the pain. "Who let you in here?" His voice came out low and rough. I swallowed hard. The door was open. He stared at me for a long moment while thunder rattled the windows behind us. Then his gaze dropped to the cleaning gloves still hanging from my trembling hands. "You should leave," he said softly. But I couldn't stop staring at the blood on the marble floor because something about it felt wrong. Too dark. Too thick. And suddenly, every exhausted little detail I'd noticed over the past month rushed back into my mind all at once. The headaches. The shaking hands. The untouched food trays. The way the guards watched him like men waiting for a clock to run out. That was the moment I realized Luca Moretti wasn't dying naturally. I barely slept after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw blood spreading across white marble while 6 armed men stood there pretending it was normal. By morning, Manhattan looked washed out beneath heavy clouds, the streets below Moretti Tower shining from the storm that had lasted until sunrise. I told myself to forget what I saw. Rich men had strange lives. Powerful men had dangerous ones. None of it was my business. But fear has a strange way of turning into curiosity when something does not make sense. By the next evening, I was back on the 43rd floor with my cleaning cart and a knot twisting tighter in my stomach. The guards barely looked at me this time. That should have made me feel safer. Somehow it made me feel worse. The penthouse felt quieter than usual. No music. No conversation. Just the low hum of the city through thick glass windows and the soft ticking of a clock somewhere deep inside the apartment. I cleaned slowly, paying attention without trying to look obvious about it. Luca was not in the main rooms. But traces of him were everywhere. Half-finished whiskey near the fireplace. Prescription bottles lined neatly beside the kitchen sink. A dark suit jacket tossed over a chair like someone had removed it in exhaustion instead of comfort. Then I noticed something strange. One of the prescription bottles had two different labels layered on top of each other. My pulse quickened. I glanced toward the hallway before carefully peeling the corner back with my thumb. The original label underneath showed a completely different medication name. I froze. Maybe the pharmacy had made a mistake. Maybe rich people changed doctors constantly. Maybe there was a normal explanation. But deep down, I already knew there was not. I heard footsteps before I could think further. I quickly placed the bottle back exactly where I found it just as Luca entered the kitchen. He looked worse than the night before. Pale. Tired. A faint shadow darkened beneath his eyes like he had not slept in weeks. Even standing still seemed to cost him energy. But the moment he saw me near the counter, his expression hardened immediately. Walls going back up. You are still here, he said quietly. I work Tuesdays through Saturdays, I answered before I could stop myself. His mouth almost twitched. Not quite a smile. More like surprise that someone spoke to him normally. He moved toward the cabinet slowly, one hand pressing briefly against the marble counter for support when he thought I was not looking. Then he poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. The second the glass touched his lips, tension rippled through his shoulders. Tiny. Almost invisible. But I noticed. 5 minutes later, he started coughing again. My chest tightened instantly. Not random. Not natural. A pattern. Luca gripped the edge of the counter while breathing carefully through his nose like a man trying very hard not to show weakness. You should sit down, I whispered. His eyes snapped toward me, cold again. Do not tell me what I should do. Another cough interrupted him before the sentence fully landed. I took one cautious step closer. I think something is wrong with your medication. Silence. Heavy and dangerous. The entire room seemed to stop breathing with him. Luca stared at me so intensely I could hear my own heartbeat. Then very slowly, his gaze shifted toward the hallway cameras mounted near the ceiling. That was when I realized something terrifying. He already knew. Or at least suspected. Before I could speak again, one of the guards entered the kitchen. Tall. Gray suit. Emotionless face. Miss Bennet, he said calmly. You are needed downstairs. His eyes flicked once toward Luca. A warning passing silently between them. Luca looked away first. Leave it alone, Claire, he said softly, almost tired now. Some truths are expensive. But as I pushed my cleaning cart back toward the elevator, one thought kept repeating in my head louder than the rain pounding against the tower windows. Somebody inside that penthouse wanted Luca Moretti sick. The human body tells the truth long before people do. That was something my mother used to say back when she worked double shifts as a nurse in Queens before cancer took almost everything from her except stubbornness. I thought about her constantly the next few days while I watched Luca Moretti slowly fall apart inside his own penthouse. Once I noticed the pattern, I could not stop seeing it. He looked stronger in the mornings. Tired, but stable. Then evening came. The whiskey appeared. The medication followed. And within an hour, the shaking started. Sometimes subtle. Sometimes bad enough that he gripped furniture when he thought nobody was looking. I began memorizing details without meaning to. Which glass he used. Which bodyguard brought the drinks. Which nights the coughing became worse. Fear sat heavy in my chest every second I stayed on that floor, but something stronger kept pushing me forward. Because nobody else seemed alarmed. Not the doctors visiting twice a week. Not the security team. Not even Luca himself. It felt less like a sickness and more like a countdown everyone had already accepted. Thursday night, the storm finally cleared over Manhattan, leaving the city wrapped in cold silver fog outside the windows. I was cleaning the library when voices drifted from the hallway. Low. Tense. I should have walked away immediately. Instead, I froze behind the partially open door. His numbers dropped again, a man muttered quietly. At this rate, he does not make it through winter. Another voice answered. Older. Calm. Then the transition happened sooner than expected. My stomach tightened instantly. Transition. Not recovery. Not treatment. I carefully peeked through the narrow opening and recognized the older man immediately. Vincent Moretti. Luca's uncle. Expensive charcoal suit. Silver hair. The kind of smile politicians practiced in mirrors. He rested one hand on the shoulder of the gray-suited guard who had warned me before. Until then, Vincent continued softly, nobody changes his routine. Understood? The guard nodded once. Yes, sir. Footsteps moved closer suddenly. I jerked backward so fast my shoulder clipped a bookshelf. The sound echoed louder than thunder in the silent room. Every breath stopped outside. Then the library door opened slowly. Vincent Moretti stood there staring directly at me. Warm brown eyes. Perfect smile. Zero warmth behind either one. You startled me, he said pleasantly. My mouth went dry. I was just cleaning. His gaze drifted toward the cart beside me. Spray bottles. Towels. Rubber gloves. Innocent things. Of course, he replied. Luca likes quiet employees. He stepped into the room slowly enough to make my skin crawl. You know, he added gently, people survive a long time in this city when they learn which questions are dangerous. My pulse pounded so hard I thought he might hear it. I do not ask questions, sir. His smile widened slightly. Good. Then he walked away. I could not breathe properly. Again until the elevator doors closed behind him 10 minutes later. That night should have scared me enough to quit. Instead, it confirmed everything. Luca was not imagining this. Somebody inside his own family expected him to die. Around midnight, I returned to the kitchen to finish wiping down the counters. The penthouse lights were dim now, casting long shadows across black marble and polished steel. Luca sat alone near the windows overlooking the city, whiskey untouched beside him for once. He looked exhausted. Not physically this time. Emotionally. Like carrying something heavy for too many years. You heard them tonight, he said quietly without turning around. Ice spread through my chest. I did not mean to. That is how trouble usually starts. His reflection stared at me through the glass. Pale face. Sharp eyes. A man already halfway isolated from the world around him. I should have apologized. Should have denied everything. Instead, I whispered the one thought I could not silence anymore. I think somebody is poisoning you. Silence swallowed the room completely. Luca closed his eyes for a long moment before speaking again. Claire, he said softly, almost sadly, if that were true, do you really think I would still be alive long enough to tell you? Some people become dangerous the moment they stop being afraid. I realized that about myself 3 days after accusing Luca Moretti of being poisoned. Because instead of running away from the penthouse like any sane person would have done, I started paying closer attention. Every detail mattered now. Every glance. Every silence. Every untouched drink left sweating on polished marble countertops. I noticed Luca stopped finishing the whiskey after our conversation that night. Not completely. Just enough to tell me he was thinking about what I said even if he refused to admit it aloud. But his condition kept getting worse anyway. Friday evening, cold rain drifted across Manhattan again, turning the city lights into blurry streaks beyond the tower windows. I arrived for work just before 7 and immediately felt the tension in the building. More guards than usual. Quiet voices over earpieces. Men in dark. Suits moving quickly through the private floors. Something important was happening upstairs. The elevator opened directly into chaos disguised as elegance. Long dining tables covered in black linen. Crystal glasses catching candlelight. Expensive food arranged like artwork nobody intended to eat. A family dinner. That explained the security. One of the house managers pulled me aside before I could even reach my cleaning cart. "Stay invisible tonight," she whispered sharply. "And do not speak unless spoken to." Then she hurried away before I could answer. By 8 o'clock, the penthouse filled with members of the Moretti family. Wealthy. Beautiful. Controlled. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every conversation sounded careful. They did not laugh loudly like normal families. They studied each other. Measured each other. Like everyone in the room expected betrayal eventually. Luca entered last. The entire atmosphere shifted the second he walked in. Not because he demanded attention. Because he carried authority so naturally that silence followed him automatically. Black suit. Pale skin. Gray-blue eyes colder than the rain outside. But I noticed something else immediately. He was already exhausted. Tiny tremors moved through his hand as he adjusted his cuff links. Vincent Moretti noticed too. "You look tired, nephew," he said smoothly from across the room. Luca sat at the head of the table without reacting. "And you look nosy, Vincent." Soft laughter spread around the room, but tension stayed underneath it like cracked ice over dark water. I kept my head down while clearing empty glasses from the side tables, trying not to draw attention to myself. Then dinner started. The wine flowed first. Then the whiskey. I watched carefully as one of the servers placed Luca's glass beside his plate. 10 minutes later, Vincent lifted his own drink in a casual toast. "To family," he said warmly. Luca took one sip. My stomach dropped instantly. 5 minutes later, his breathing changed. Barely noticeable unless someone was watching closely. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Another few minutes and color drained slowly from his face beneath the candlelight. Nobody reacted. Nobody except me. They were waiting for it. I realized that with absolute certainty. Waiting for him to weaken right in front of them. Luca reached for his water glass, but his hand shook hard enough that some spilled across the tablecloth. Still nobody moved. One woman quietly continued eating dessert. Another man checked his watch. Rage rose hot and sudden inside my chest before fear could stop it. I crossed the room without thinking. "Do not drink that," I whispered beside Luca's chair. His eyes lifted toward mine instantly. Sharp despite the pain spreading through him. Around us, the entire table fell silent. Vincent smiled politely. "Excuse me." My pulse hammered so violently I thought I might faint. But I could not stop now. "Something is wrong with the whiskey," I said louder this time. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Luca stared at me for one long unreadable second. Then slowly, very slowly, he pushed the glass away from himself for the first time since I met him. And Vincent Moretti stopped smiling. The silence after I accused the whiskey felt heavier than fear. It pressed against my lungs while 20 pairs of eyes locked onto me across candlelight and crystal glasses. I could hear rain tapping softly against the giant windows behind the dining room, but inside the penthouse, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed too loudly. Vincent Moretti leaned back slowly in his chair, elegant and calm like a man listening to an amusing joke instead of a direct accusation. "That is a serious statement from a cleaning lady," he said smoothly. Luca still had not touched the glass again. His pale fingers rested near it on the tablecloth while his breathing remained shallow and controlled. He looked at me differently now. Not angry. Not surprised. Evaluating. Like he was trying to decide whether I was brave or stupid. Honestly, I was beginning to wonder the same thing myself. "Claire," Vincent continued warmly, "perhaps you are confused about your responsibilities here." "Perhaps she is not," Luca interrupted quietly. Every head turned toward him instantly. The room changed the second he spoke. Authority rolled off him, even exhausted and half sick. He slowly pushed his chair back from the table and stood. For a moment, I thought he might collapse again. One hand tightened against the edge of the chair hard enough for his knuckles to pale, but he stayed upright through sheer force of will. "Everyone out," Luca said calmly. No one argued. Not even Vincent. That frightened me more than anything else so far. Men like Vincent Moretti looked like they spent their lives controlling rooms, not obeying orders inside them. Yet one by one, the family members rose silently from the table and disappeared into the hallway. The guards followed. The servers vanished next. Within less than a minute, the enormous dining room stood empty except for Luca and me. Candlelight flickered across the black marble walls while thunder rolled softly above Manhattan. Luca stared at the untouched whiskey for several long seconds before finally speaking. "Why would you say that in front of them?" His voice sounded tired instead of angry. I swallowed hard. Because nobody else was going to. He looked at me then. Fully looked at me in a way he never had before. Not as staff. Not as background noise moving through his apartment. Like I had suddenly become real. "You think my family is trying to kill me?" "I think somebody is." Silence stretched between us. Luca walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the city, shoulders tense beneath his black suit jacket. 3 doctors diagnosed me with a degenerative blood disorder," he said quietly. "The best specialists money can buy. Doctors can be paid." The words escaped before fear could stop them. Luca let out a low breath that almost sounded like humor without actually becoming laughter. "You really do not know who you are talking to, do you?" "I know exactly who I am talking to," I whispered. "A man who gets worse every single night after drinking from the same bottle." He turned back toward me sharply at that. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not belief yet. But doubt. Dangerous doubt. Before either of us could speak again, the dining room doors opened. The gray-suited guard stepped inside carrying another whiskey bottle sealed inside a silver bucket of ice. "Fresh bottle for Mr. Moretti," he announced calmly. Luca stared at it without moving. So did I. Then something small caught my attention. The seal around the neck had already been broken once and pressed back into place carefully enough that most people would never notice. Most people except someone who spent every night polishing glass and handling expensive liquor bottles for rich clients. My pulse spiked instantly. "Do not drink that," I whispered again. The guard's expression changed for half a second. Tiny. Almost invisible. But panic flashed there before discipline buried it again. Luca noticed too. I saw it happen in real time. His entire body went still. Cold. Focused. Like a predator waking up after months asleep. "Leave the bottle," Luca said softly. The guard obeyed immediately and exited the room. Luca waited until the doors closed completely before approaching the table. Then very carefully, he lifted the bottle toward the candlelight. His jaw tightened almost instantly. The seal was tampered with, he murmured. I stopped breathing. Luca looked at me again, but this time there was no distance left in his eyes. Only realization settling slowly into something dark and dangerous. Claire, he said quietly, I need you to tell me everything you have noticed since the day you started working here. Trust changes people faster than fear ever does. Before that night, Luca Moretti barely looked at me unless I was cleaning something in his path. After the whiskey bottle, everything changed. The penthouse felt different over the next week. Quieter. Tighter. Like the entire building knew something dangerous had shifted beneath the surface even if nobody said it aloud. Luca stopped attending most public dinners. Meetings moved upstairs into his private office where only a handful of trusted men were allowed inside. The gray-suited guard disappeared completely 2 days later. Nobody mentioned him again. Nobody asked questions. I was beginning to understand that silence was its own language inside the Moretti empire. Friday night, snow started falling over Manhattan for the first time that winter. Thick white flakes drifted past the tower windows while the city below glowed gold and silver beneath Christmas lights. The penthouse should have felt warm. Instead it felt restless. Luca had not slept in almost 30 hours. I knew because every time I entered a room, I found evidence of him there moments earlier. Half-empty espresso cups. Files spread across tables. Medication untouched beside the sink. He was searching for answers now. Searching hard. Around midnight, I found him standing alone in the kitchen staring at a folder filled with medical reports. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with poison anymore. This was betrayal settling into his bones. You should eat something, I said quietly before thinking better of it. Luca glanced up from the papers. Normally a comment like that would have earned me one cold look and silence. Instead he surprised me by asking, did you always ignore self-preservation this aggressively? I blinked. Excuse me. Most people in this building avoid speaking to me unless necessary. Snow reflected faintly in his gray-blue eyes as he studied me over the kitchen island. You keep giving me instructions. I looked down awkwardly. Sorry. Do not apologize. His voice softened unexpectedly. It is unfamiliar. That single word hit me harder than it should have. Unfamiliar. Like nobody had worried whether he slept. Or ate. Or survived. Luca closed the medical folder slowly. Sit down, Claire. My pulse stumbled instantly. Every survival instinct told me refusing was safer. Somehow I sat anyway. The marble kitchen island suddenly felt much too close to him. Luca poured water instead of whiskey this time. That alone felt important. You said your mother was a nurse, he said. I stared at him in surprise. How did you know that? One corner of his mouth moved slightly. I know everything about the people inside my home. A chill slid down my spine, though not entirely from fear. Then you know she got sick when I was 19. Luca nodded once. You left community college to care for her. Hearing pieces of my life spoken aloud inside this enormous penthouse made me feel strangely exposed. I was studying nursing, I admitted quietly. Only for a year. And now you clean floors for people who would not survive one day doing what your mother did. His tone held no cruelty. Just observation. That somehow made it worse. I looked away toward the falling snow outside. Life changes. Silence settled between us again. Heavy but no longer hostile. Then Luca surprised me for the second time that night. Why do you care if I live? The question came out low and honest enough to hurt. No arrogance. No power. Just a tired man asking something real for maybe the first time in years. I swallowed carefully before answering. Because everyone else acts like your death is already decided. Luca stared at me without moving. Something vulnerable flickered briefly behind his eyes before disappearing beneath control again. Then suddenly the penthouse lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. My breath caught. Somewhere down the hallway, alarms began screaming through the tower. Darkness changes a room faster than violence ever could. 1 second the kitchen glowed warm beneath pendant lights and falling snow outside the windows. The next, the entire penthouse vanished into black silence while alarms screamed through the tower like something alive. I jumped so hard my chair nearly tipped backward. Somewhere down the hallway, men started shouting over each other through radios. Elevator systems beeped. Heavy footsteps pounded across marble floors. But Luca did not move. That terrified me most of all. He stood perfectly still beside the kitchen island, one hand resting calmly against the counter while red emergency lights slowly flickered on overhead. The crimson glow sharpened every angle of his face until he looked less human and more dangerous than I had ever seen him before. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The command hit instantly. Cold. Controlled. Familiar to him in ways I suddenly understood came from years of surviving betrayal. Another alarm blared through the penthouse. Then the private office doors down the hall slammed open. 3 guards rushed inside, hands near concealed weapons beneath dark jackets. "Backup generators are offline," one of them said sharply. "Security feeds are down on floors 40 through 43. Luca's expression hardened immediately. "That is not an accident." The guards exchanged uneasy looks. Snow continued drifting outside the windows while Manhattan glittered below us, completely unaware something dangerous was unfolding 43 stories above the street. "Get Vincent on the phone," Luca ordered. "Now." One guard hesitated barely half a second too long. Luca noticed instantly. "Problem?" The man swallowed. "Sir. Vincent left the building 20 minutes ago." Silence. Heavy and immediate. Luca slowly turned toward the windows again, jaw tightening once. Just once. Then the calm returned so quickly it frightened me. "Of course he did," he murmured softly. Suddenly another sound echoed through the dark penthouse. Glass breaking somewhere upstairs. Every guard spun toward the noise instantly. Luca grabbed my wrist before I could even react. The contact shocked me silent. His hand felt cold from stress and exhaustion, but steady. Protective. "Claire stays with me," he said without looking away from the hallway. One of the guards frowned. "Sir, with respect, she should leave the floor immediately." "No," the answer came sharp enough to cut through the alarms. The guards obeyed instantly. Luca released my wrist slowly a second later, like he had only realized then he was still holding it. "Someone disabled the security system to move through the tower unseen," he said quietly to me. "Which means this was planned." Fear crawled higher into my chest. Planned for what? Before he could answer, all the emergency lights suddenly died too. Total darkness swallowed us again. My breath caught hard. Then came footsteps. Slow. Measured. Approaching from the hallway beyond the kitchen. Every guard stiffened immediately. Luca moved in front of me before I could even think. Not dramatically. Naturally. Like protecting people was instinct even after everything done to him. A soft click echoed through the darkness. Then a woman's voice drifted from the hallway, calm as winter itself. "You always were difficult to kill, Luca." The emergency lights flickered back on weakly enough to reveal a figure standing near the dining room entrance. Eleanor Moretti. Luca's aunt. Late 60s. Elegant silver dress. Perfect posture. She looked more like a senator's wife than someone standing calmly inside a darkened penthouse while security alarms screamed around her. Luca's face became unreadable. You shut down my building. Eleanor's eyes shifted toward me briefly. I wanted privacy. Something cold slid through my stomach instantly. She was not surprised to see me there. Which meant she already knew about me. You should not have involved outsiders, Eleanor continued softly. Especially not girls who ask questions. Luca stepped slightly closer to me. Tiny movement. Huge meaning. Careful, he warned. Eleanor smiled sadly. Do you know why your father died, Luca? The entire room froze. Even the guards stopped moving. Luca's voice dropped lower. More dangerous. Do not talk about him. But Eleanor continued anyway. Because he became addicted to power instead of mercy. Just like you. Her gaze sharpened. I spent 2 years trying to make your death look natural because this family cannot survive another monster wearing the Moretti name. The words crashed through the room harder than the alarms ever had. And beside me, for the first time since I met him, Luca Moretti looked genuinely heartbroken. People think powerful men break when bullets come for them. They do not. They break when love and betrayal arrive wearing the same face. The red emergency lights painted long shadows across the penthouse while Eleanor Moretti stood perfectly calm in the middle of the chaos she created. Snow drifted behind her through the giant windows overlooking Manhattan, soft and peaceful against a room filled with secrets sharp enough to destroy families. Luca had not moved since her confession. He stood frozen beside me, one hand clenched at his side so tightly I could see tension shaking through his fingers. Not from illness this time. From grief. You poisoned me for 2 years, he said finally. His voice sounded strangely empty. Eleanor's expression softened instead of hardening. Slowly, she admitted quietly. Enough to weaken you. Enough to force the board into transition before you became your father all over again. Luca laughed once under his breath. Cold. Disbelieving. You could have just killed me. No, for the first time, emotion cracked through Eleanor's calm composure. I raised you after your mother died. I taught you how to tie your shoes. I held you through nightmares when you were 7 years old. Her voice trembled faintly. I loved you too much to destroy you quickly. Silence swallowed the room again. I felt sick listening to them because somehow her words sounded horrifying and heartbreakingly sincere at the same time. Luca looked away first. Toward the snow outside. Toward the city he ruled while his own family quietly waited for him to disappear. You decided I was beyond saving, he murmured. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward me then. Until she arrived. Every guard in the room tensed instantly. Luca noticed too. He stepped in front of me automatically again. Do not involve Claire in this. Eleanor sighed softly. Luca, the moment she made you question the poisoning, she became involved. Fear crawled down my spine. What does that mean? Nobody answered immediately. That silence told me enough. Luca turned sharply toward his guards. Get her out of the building. Already too late, Eleanor whispered. Then every light in the penthouse suddenly exploded white again as backup power surged through the tower. The alarms cut off instantly. Somewhere downstairs, elevator doors opened. More footsteps. Fast. Urgent. One of the guards pressed a hand against his earpiece, face draining of color. Sir, he said tightly, there are men moving through the lower floors asking for Miss Bennet by name. Ice flooded my chest. Luca's entire expression changed. Every trace of heartbreak vanished beneath pure cold focus. How many? At least 12. Luca grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and shoved it toward me. Put this on. My hands shook. Luca, now, Claire. I obeyed instantly because the look in his eyes terrified me more than the alarms had. Not fear for himself. Fear for me. Eleanor stepped closer slowly. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "Vincent never intended for this to stay quiet forever." The second Luca started resisting the treatment, the board became unstable. "You made him dangerous." Again. I stared at her in disbelief. Dangerous because he stopped dying. Dangerous because he started caring whether he lived. The words landed harder than I expected. Luca was already issuing orders to his guards in a voice sharp enough to slice through steel. "Secure elevators. Lock private exits. Nobody enters the penthouse without his authorization." The entire empire moved instantly around one terrified cleaning lady from Queens. I could barely process it. Luca turned back toward me one final time while snow continued falling beyond the windows behind him. His gray-blue eyes looked exhausted. Furious. Protective. Human. "Claire," he said quietly, "if anyone separates you from me tonight, do not trust them. Not the guards. Not my family. Nobody." My pulse hammered wildly. What is happening? Luca stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that only I could hear the answer. "For the first time in 2 years," he whispered, "they think I finally have something worth surviving for. Winter in Manhattan feels quieter after survival." 3 months after the night the Moretti family finally turned on itself, snow still drifted softly past the penthouse windows, but the building no longer felt like a tomb waiting for Luca Moretti to die inside it. The silence had changed. Warmer somehow. Human. I noticed it first in the mornings. The whiskey bottles disappeared from the kitchen counters. Fresh coffee replaced them instead. The medical report stopped piling across the dining table. The doctors visiting the penthouse now spoke about recovery instead of management. Real recovery. Slow. Complicated. But real. Vincent Moretti vanished from the city 2 days after the blackout. Nobody told me where he went. Nobody needed to. Eleanor resigned from the family board within the same week. I heard she moved to a small estate in Vermont where snow covered everything except regret. Luca never spoke about either of them again. Some wound stayed too deep for language. The strangest part was how quickly the empire adjusted once Luca stopped dying. Men who once watched him like a countdown clock suddenly stood straighter around him now. Fear returned to the building. But something else returned too. Respect. One snowy Thursday evening, I finished wiping fingerprints from the glass conference room doors on the 39th floor when my phone buzzed with a text from Luca himself. "Come upstairs." 4 simple words. My pulse still reacted every time his name appeared on my screen. I hated that a little. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse, and for a moment I just stood there staring. Everything looked different. Smaller somehow without all the fear living inside it. The black marble floors still gleamed beneath soft gold lighting. Manhattan still stretched endlessly beyond the windows. But now music drifted quietly through the apartment. Frank Sinatra. Low and warm. Luca stood near the fireplace without his suit jacket for once, dark sweater sleeves pushed slightly up his forearms while snow swirled outside behind him. Health had started returning slowly to his face over the past months. Not completely. Some exhaustion still lingered beneath his eyes. Some betrayals never fully left the body. But he looked alive now. Truly alive. "You text your cleaning lady like a mafia boss," I said before I could stop myself. One corner of his mouth lifted. Real amusement this time. "You stopped being my cleaning lady months ago." The words settled softly between us. Dangerous in a completely different way now. My eyes drifted toward the cardboard boxes stacked near the dining room table. "What is all this?" Luca walked toward them slowly. "You once said your mother worked at free clinics in Queens." I blinked in surprise. Yes. You also said there were not enough affordable care centers in your neighborhood. My stomach tightened. Luca, he handed me a folder quietly. Architectural permits. Funding approvals. Medical partnership contracts. All stamped finalized. I stared down at the pages while my hands started trembling. You bought a clinic? 3. I looked up too quickly. Luca studied me carefully then, his gray-blue eyes softer than I had ever seen them before. People spent 2 years trying to convince me survival was pointless, he said quietly. Then a woman pushing a cleaning cart walked into my home and became the first person angry enough to keep me alive. Emotion climbed painfully into my throat. I just noticed patterns. No, he stepped closer slowly. You noticed me. Silence wrapped around us while snow continued falling over Manhattan outside the glass walls. I realized then how close he was standing. Close enough to see the faint silver scar near his jawline. Close enough to notice he no longer smelled like whiskey and medicine all the time. Just cedar and coffee and winter air. Luca reached past me then, fingers brushing lightly against the marble counter beside my hand instead of touching me directly. Careful. Controlled. Like a man terrified of ruining something fragile. Claire, he said softly, for years everyone in this city treated me like a monster waiting to happen. His eyes held mine steadily. You walked into my life and treated me like someone worth saving instead. My chest hurt with the weight of it. Everything this strange broken man had survived. Everything he still carried quietly beneath expensive suits and cold authority. Somewhere below us, Manhattan kept moving through another snowy night without noticing the empire above it had changed forever. I looked down and realized I was still holding my cleaning gloves in one hand. Luca noticed too. Then unexpectedly, gently, he took them from me and set them aside on the marble counter. You can stop cleaning up after everyone now, he whispered. Let someone finally take care of you.